you forgive me, I'll remain seated. So thank you for that introduction. I think the first thing I would say is that any words of wisdom would be coming from another source, but they may come through the mouth, as it were. So thank you for the invitation again to share some thoughts together. We've already had a few minutes of silence, which I think are always very important ways of gathering ourselves to be present together. Can you hear me all right? Okay, thank you. I'm sure we're here today and at this summer school because we're trying to find, in some way, a greater meaning and understanding of life and how to live it. We bring our minds and emotions in our bodies to listen, think, experience. Over the summer school we'll hear some wonderful ideas. And of course, you already have travelled far on the spiritual journey, otherwise I don't think you'd be here at all. But I'm sure that we may be confused by all the different teachings that we come across in life. Many of us find meditation actually quite difficult, and perhaps be a bit frightened by all the effort and commitment all these things seem to call upon us. If you think about, if that rings true to you, then where are they coming from? And in a way they are primarily thought processes and responses. And thus actually you've already identified the source of much of the problem. Most of the work's been done then. We can go home, really. It's mainly thoughts. So perhaps, though, we'll put it into context. And since we are here using our mind, let us help it to understand the structure and the process that we are looking for, and thus be less afraid and confused, and opening the way to experiencing what is often called wisdom. I've often found it very helpful to understand our teachings by starting with the constitution of mankind, which I'm sure many of you will be extremely familiar with, but if you'll indulge me, I'll still summarise because it builds a picture. So we go about life in our physical bodies, which are organised by the etheric double, the energy field. We're happy, for instance, to undergo surgery and have parts removed, but we don't see that we've lost our identity. Our bodies are our vehicle, but they're not us. When we look at our emotions, they're of course very powerful. They can drive us to enjoy things, but also to do and say things we regret. They tend to have a life of their own, it seems. And often we think that our emotions are very much part of who we are. But if we look, for instance, at an actor who can produce emotions to order, depending on what the scene requires, or when we look at some action that's happened to us, we might, if somebody was to push us, for instance, we might be a little angry, and then turn round to find that somebody's fallen over and fallen into us. And so our anger may immediately change, hopefully, to concern. And so our emotions depend, therefore, on our thoughts and perceptions of the situation. They change really very rapidly. So they're not us either, then. Now let us pay attention to the lower mind, which pretty well always is very busy. It's often called the monkey mind. We've filled it with thoughts throughout life. The lower mind is like a computer. What you put in is what you could get out, but no more. That's a very important insight because it means that you'll never be able to understand the divine through thought alone. Philosophy or theology will have to be limited if it's only at the level of the mind that you're working. You'll have probably had the experience that when you sit to meditate or to revise for an exam, almost immediately that monkey mind is thinking of anything other than what you've decided to do. But you decided to study or to meditate. But this mind is rushing off thinking of cups of coffee and friends, and the chair's a bit hard and anything. So it's obvious really that you are not this monkey mind. And so the question, of course, is who are you? That is the question. The question. When we quieten this mind, when we meditate or are enraptured by beauty or other methods that we have to quieten that mind, you may have had a sudden sense of peace, of love, even and oneness of life. It may only happen once in a lifetime, it may happen frequently, but you may have had that sort of experience. You may have a special insight about something. Many scientists make their discoveries in this way. Or you may suddenly know what to do or say in any particular situation. In our teachings, we have the idea that we're now working in what we've labelled, and they are labelled still, the higher mind, the mind that puts the relationship between things together rather than the concrete computer-type mind. Often said it's, for most people, when the apple drops off a tree, it's an apple that's dropped off a tree. For Newton, it was gravity. So that's the sort of sense, the difference between lower and higher mind. And beyond the higher mind, we say we have an intuition where all life is experienced as love and unity, buddhi. And beyond those is spirit, which ultimately is one in the divine. In Sanskrit terms, I'm sure you're very aware, Atma, Buddhi and Manas, of course. The part of us that is made in the image of God. St. Paul says very clearly, we are a spirit, a soul and body. As we said before, personality perhaps is a more useful term than body. I find it so, as it's the mask that we wear in this earthly journey. And the soul, I could say, is that of the higher mind, the intuition and part of spirit. Takes on a personality, of course, at each birth. The personality of the lower mind, emotions, etheric and physical matter. And then we believe that this personality is me. At what we call death, we let it go again. As we've already shown, when we quieten the usual me of mind, we are still present. And therefore we are a soul inhabiting a personality, a being not subject to time, having an earthly experience. And of course this is the reverse of how we normally think, but it's the only way of making sense of our own evidence. And it's absolutely the key to understanding the spiritual life. I'm very aware that you'll be familiar with these ideas, and you might say, well, there's nothing new. But there's a difference between knowing it with our mind and knowing it for ourselves, for sure, as it were. And that key is that we are a soul inhabiting a personality is crucial to understanding what we're trying to do. And we're also aware that this personality creates this own identity and then defends this identity at all costs, quite literally willing to kill to keep it. It can be angry, jealous, grabbing, taking from life, all sorts of things that we call negative. And that period is part of our development, like a child. We take as a child, usually. But gradually, through life experience, we learn to love, to think of others, to serve, and to feel happier for doing so, beginning to transcend the lower mind into the higher. We grow up. And this problem then, as a Zen master observed, the problem for humanity, as a summary, is that it is lost in thought. It's not an unfamiliar thought to you. Madame Blavatsky, of course, in The Voice of the Silence, very famously wrote, "The mind is the slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer." And later, "The way to final freedom is within yourself. And that way begins and ends outside the personal self." Freedom begins and ends not in the personal self, but outside it. I found a very useful image is that of a mountain. Again, you've probably seen that idea before, the mountain reflected in the lake. The mountain, we may say, has the spirit or Atma as its peak, and then the buddhi or intuition, and then the higher mind at the shore level. And then into the water we have the reflection of the personality, the image, the reflection. The lower mind at the water's edge, next the emotions, and finally the peak reflected as the physical and etheric bodies. And those reflections are also true in the spiritual and psychological sense, as Dr. Timely says in his book on self-culture. So that the higher mind ideas are reflected in the lower. That's how we understand and think. The intuition is reflected into the emotions. We can have tears of joy or inspiration and intuition. And the divine will of the spirit, the peak, reflected into action at the physical level, the peak reflected in the lake. And you can work with those connections in your spiritual and daily life as well. And so we can say that the waters of the lake are the lower mind, and when they're still, the mountain, of course, is perfectly reflected. When there is a storm, no mountain can be seen in the lake at all. And so when we still this lower mind, the real higher self is perfectly reflected into the personality. It is as simple as that. The calming of the storm is the spiritual life for most of us. And that is why the steps in all traditions of the spiritual life are traditionally given, slightly differently sometimes, but of purification and contemplation, which are ways of stilling the storm of the personality, of purifying our daily life and our minds. And then we move into illumination and finally union. Gradually, we raise our focus of consciousness from the physical plane through the emotions, then the mind, crossing the threshold of the waterline, as it were, Sanskrit, the Antakarana, the bridge, into the higher mind, intuition, and finally the spirit. We move from the concrete material world to the unseen sphere of the energetic worlds. We move from the unreal to the real. As H.P. Blavatsky wrote in the first edition of the Theosophical magazine, by that higher intuition acquired by Theosophical, or God knowledge, which carried the mind from the world of form into that of formless spirit, man has been sometimes enabled in every age and every country to perceive things in the interior or invisible world. And in the key to Theosophy, this secret wisdom, Theosophy, cannot be attained by study alone, because it is a superhuman knowledge, infinite in nature, which can be communicated to the higher spiritual self in a state of ecstasy. This is the mystical state, known to all mystics throughout the ages and of any tradition. This is important, I think, because our minds like to know that all these ideas that we learn of, including in the different religions, are not some man-made fantasy, some philosophy, but attempts to tell us by those who have first-hand experience about the most wonderful experiences and the goal of life on this earth, and to help us share this too. In this ecstasy, the Christian will say they are in Christ consciousness. The Hindu might say that he is in Krishna consciousness, depending on his line of approach. The Buddhist may say he is in nirvana. The names do not matter. Names are labels applied by the lower mind, of course. It is a state of bliss, of love, of wisdom, the true self of each one of us. This is our goal, and it sounds wonderful. But our lower mind does not believe it, as it cannot possibly experience it for itself, as it's beyond its capacity. It's not the level at which we experience these things. And this is why spiritual things for many people do not exist, as they seldom access this level. Because what you pay attention to is what is real to you. And that can be shown scientifically with experiments with sound and sight. And the most obvious is that if you enter a room where people are talking, you have to focus on the conversation that you're planning to have, as it were, or trying to have. And if you hear your name perhaps mentioned elsewhere, suddenly your focus shifts. What are they saying about me, perhaps? And then you can't hear what the person saying to you, next to you, is saying anymore, because your attention has shifted. So what you pay attention to is what is real for you. You create your own reality by what you choose to listen, think, and pay attention to. It's like retuning to a radio station. We don't know that it exists until we tune into it. And then it becomes real for us. And this is entirely true of the spiritual life. So if we don't tune in to that radio station, then it will not be real to us until gently it forces its way in, as it were, sometimes painfully. We create our own reality, and we select that reality beforehand, which is why we see and hear and understand things that we choose to see and hear, rather than what we actually might hear. But if our consciousness goes beyond that lower mind, the illusion that it has created for so long, in a sense, is shattered. The lower mind loses the power to let us believe that it is us, our true self. It therefore loses control and identity, so carefully nurtured over all this time, maybe many lifetimes in a sense, although each lower mind is new each time, but that self-identity is generated. And so from its point of view, from the lower mind's point of view, it dies. And it will try to stop this at all costs. When you meditate, it will struggle harder to distract you. When you want love and peace, it will find a problem somewhere or with someone. It will tell you that love and peace and wisdom are some perhaps vague fantasy. It's okay, but don't go there too much. It does not really exist. For to the lower mind, they don't. So here then is needed the effort, the courage, the will, the force of love and service to ignore the temptings of the lower mind and to aim for the higher consciousness, to aim for love and wisdom and peace, to dare to let go of identity, to dare to let go of all that we call familiar and safe, that we know, and to step into what we think is the unknown, to step into the flame of wisdom. Here we will be burned. Our personality will be consumed as the wax of a candle is consumed, but only so that the flame of light burns more brightly, or the phoenix rises from the ashes. The great achievement. In the voice of the silence, poetically we're told, "No conqueror of sins that once a stream winner has crossed the seventh path. All nature thrills with joyous awe and feels subdued. The silver star now twinkles out the news to the night blossoms. The streamlet to the pebbles ripples out the tale. Dark ocean waves will roar it to the rocks surf-bound. Scent-laden breezes sing it to the vales. And stately pines mysteriously whisper, a master has arisen, a master of the day." In Buddhism, we're familiar with the term, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. But also, the sea slips into the dewdrop. Ruysbroek, the great Flemish mystic, exclaimed, "Everything that I have, he takes. All that he is, he gives." Can anything be more terrifying or wonderful? In Buddhism and Hinduism, this process is a renunciation, a letting go. In Christianity is symbolized by the crucifixion and resurrection. The letting go of the personality, the earthly personality, symbolized as dying on the cross of matter, 4 points of matter. But what follows is the liberation, the resurrection of the real Christ, the incarnate love, our true self. For the Christian story is the story of humanity told in a way that we can remember it. But it's the journey for each one of us back home. And these steps are initiations, sometimes have names and labels. This can be seen as the fourth great step, the initiation of Arhat, using Eastern terms. As C.W. Leadbeater tells us in The Masters and the Path, of course in other traditions too. Geoffrey Hodgson records in The Light of the Sanctuary, in the occult life, that to which you cling, you lose. That which you renounce, you retain. Let go. Indeed, letting go is the great theme in the spiritual life. We are asked to let go of all our preconceived ideas and beliefs, our self-identity, our assumptions, Letting go is the great theme in all the ancient mysteries, death and resurrection. St. Paul says, "I die daily," for in every moment we have the opportunity and necessity even to let go of what we think and simply see clearly a pure awareness, a love. Eckhart Tolle, in his book Stillness Speaks, he's also the author of The Power of Now, of course, offers some beautiful distillations of the ancient wisdom, primarily from the Buddhist tradition. I'm going to quote quite a few for a moment. Most people's lives are run by desire and fear. Desire is the need to add something to yourself in order to be yourself more fully. All fear is the fear of losing something and thereby becoming diminished and being less. These two movements obscure the fact that being cannot be given or taken away. Being in its fullness is already within you, now. You say, he lost his life, or my life. As if life were something that you can possess or lose. The truth is, you don't have a life. You are life. The one life, the one consciousness that pervades the entire universe and takes temporary form to experience itself as a stone or a blade of grass, or as an animal, a person, a star or a galaxy. What is wisdom and where is it to be found? Wisdom comes with the ability to be still. Just look and just listen. No more is needed. Being still, looking and listening activates the non-conceptual intelligence within you. Let stillness direct your words and actions. Wisdom is not a product of thought. The deep knowing that is wisdom arises through the simple act of giving someone or something your full attention. Attention is primordial intelligence, consciousness itself. It dissolves the barriers created by conceptual thought, and with this comes the recognition that nothing exists in and by itself. It joins the perceiver and the perceived in a unifying field of awareness. It is the healer of separation. Stillness is your essential nature. What is stillness? The inner space or awareness in which the words on this page are being perceived and become thoughts. Without that awareness, there'd be no perception, no thoughts, no world. You are that awareness, disguised as a person. The I am that is deeper than name and form. These quotes suggest a quiet, non-striving way of accessing the wisdom that we can be and are. Sometimes we strive too much We want to add to what we know and are, which in that sense is of the personality. It implies, of course, that anyone can take this step. It does not depend on head learning, the doctrine of the I, as this Voice and Silence calls it. Depends on the doctrine of the heart. And you can do it today. Why wait till tomorrow? So we're reminded that our essence is being. I am. The one life simply expressing itself. That we are simply a unit of this ever-changing expression. And so to summarize this part of the divine nature, this is the inner knowing, or wisdom, or gnosis. It is also true and expresses itself in love, becomes a trinity of manifestation. And we as humans have forgotten this, so we've become aware of a sense of separate self, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, mind again, that led to the descent from the Garden of Eden. But as we ignore the illusion that our thoughts are us, we can again know our true self. Ignoring our thoughts is the same as paying attention to another, or to the divine, or listening, or loving, or service. Anything we do that does not fall back into thinking that we are doing something. When we see a beautiful sunrise over the mountains, it can be an uplifting experience, and we are in awe. And yet the moment the mind says, that is beautiful, or I am seeing this, you're no longer in that experience. It now is a memory, even of a second ago. But when we're in the now moment, there is no future and no past, it is only awareness. The connection between the real and the unreal is now open. The spirit, the soul, and the personality are perfectly aligned in a unity. Being I am just is. Time and space have no relevance. It is on earth as it is in heaven. Matter has been divinized, made divine. The essence of Zen has been described as doing one thing at a time. It means to be total in what we do, to give complete attention. This is surrendered action and empowered action. And so perhaps we need not be quite so frightened of the spiritual life. It is actually quite simple. And as we begin to truly know that truth and bliss are the essence of who we are, we can dare to transcend the lower mind without so much fear and struggle. And it can then take its place to the higher life, become a receptacle and tool for the soul to work through on this planet. It will know its place, its appropriate place in the scheme of things, which is another term for humbleness. The chalice or cup is a beautiful symbol of the relationship between form and life, a symbol of our personality and of the worldly manifested universe. Its function, however, is to be empty of self, to contain the wine of wisdom which cannot be defined and yet must be contained on this lower plane to be of use. In this journey home, back to our source, we're never alone when we look at it from a separate perspective. Obviously we never can be because we're not separate. But from our journey, from our separateness to the oneness, we're aided, of course, by that higher self until we know that that's what we are. We may also choose to work with others, as we do here at the summer school, in meditation and in study, or through ritual, and gradually tread the path of discipleship, in which a master of the wisdom greatly assists the steps that the disciple works on himself or herself, and selflessly for the good of humanity. This pathway of hastened attainment, as it's called, remains a very real and always open to those qualifying themselves for these wonderful opportunities. The Masters make that very clear, for instance, in The Light of the Sanctuary by Geoffrey Hodson, that path remains open with them, to them. It also makes it clear that ritual or sacramental mysticism has often been such a valid access method. The ancient mysteries, for instance, of Egypt, Greece, Crete, Israel, especially in the Western world, were the vehicles of the most sacred teachings of those civilizations, where the candidate learned of the nature of the world, the universe, and themselves through study, but most importantly through experience, direct experience. And there are still reflections of those mysteries that make this still possible today as an access method. In our own tradition, Annie Besant, C.W. Leadbeater, J.R. Wedgwood, Geoffrey Hodson, many others, including some very well-known theosophists and most of the presidents of the Theosophical Society, were at the forefront of the Master's attempt to reinvigorate and spiritualize other traditions such as Christianity, co-Freemasonry, probably Martinism and others that I cannot mention, especially geared for the Western temperament, to use ritual as a method. Because sacramental mysticism attempts to connect the real and the unreal, heaven and earth, especially through the connecting mechanism which is ourselves, humanity, as a link. Using right intention and love, and the methods of symbolism. Symbols, of course, are not just a representation, but a transmitter of the truths that they carry. As an example, for instance, feel the difference between a circle and a square when you next look at them. Anyway, using symbolism, action, colour, incense, words of power. This power, of course, words, of course, are creation, making connections and creating. They need to be inwardly authorized in a specifically scientific way. And sacramental mysticism, therefore, gently bypasses the lower mind. Without a struggle, it uses it, in fact, as a doorway, and consciousness is gradually raised safely through the initiations or degrees. The fire of Kundalini is carefully channeled up the spine, vivifying the chakras in the correct order and at the right time. One day the spark could fan into the flame of wisdom. This is one of the meanings of the caduceus, or the rod of Hermes, the rod with two snakes entwined upon it. It's very familiar to you in many traditions, and of course a symbol of healing, symbol of Kundalini rising up the spine. At the top are wings, symbolizing freedom from the illusion of the lower worlds. The same meaning as the snake of wisdom arising from the forehead or ajna center of Egyptian initiates in the pictures. And then the ancient adage becomes true: as above, so below. and man, know thyself. You'll find more in the book The Concealed Wisdom in World Mythology by Geoffrey Hodson, if you want to follow that line. So one day, in this or another life on earth, each one of us will dare to touch the flame of wisdom, to return to unity consciously. As it says in a very sacred ritual, choose your way, my brother, remembering that in the truly great, these ways are one, for each is to the glory of God. Thank you.